We are live. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It is 10 a.m. on June 18th. We made it halfway through the year, so we have lots to go over today. And thank you guys all for joining us for our second quarter broker call. I have some dynamic speakers that are going to be joining us today as well. Per your request, I've been listening to some of the advice that you've been giving me on different speakers that you're looking to hear from. But we reached out to a couple of them that we partnered with in the past, and they were willing to hop on our call and speak to you today. So thank you for being here for that. I want to first start off by welcoming one of our newest agents, Mr. Eric Israel, joined us a few weeks ago, and he is brand new to the real estate market and the real estate industry, but he's excited to get out there and learn and build his business. He's already, in his short time with us, done an open house. He's already been on a buyer consultation with me. So he is eager to learn and get his business built. So Eric, welcome to the Phoenix Real Estate Group.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So if anyone needs any help or has any interesting things going on in their businesses, I would encourage you to reach out to Eric and see kind of if he needs help with anything or if he wants to join you on some of those appointments. I can tell already just by being with him the short time that he's going to be good. He has the personality and he has the whereabout to make the business grow. So, Brian, you want to talk about a little bit about the housekeeping items?
Yeah, we are virtual, so obviously if you can keep your mics muted if you're not speaking. If you'd like to use the raise the hand feature, you'll see that on the bottom toolbar. Oh, here I am on the right. And just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, Selena. So keep the profanities down. And
Dang, in front of everyone.
so let me introduce our fearless leader, our designated broker, and the speaker, Earl Stringfellow. He'll take everything over. I'll just be on the tech side. So if you need anything, send us a message, or need me, send me a message, right? Mr.
All right.
Stringfellow.
Thank you, sir. So today, as I mentioned, we have kind of a jam-packed meeting. It'll go from now until about 11:30. We're going to have on first Miss Rachel Roberts from UME Assumptions. She's going to join us in a couple minutes here. And then to talk to us a little bit about the assumption process and the shifting market that we're in. We've been seeing a lot more people doing assumptions to purchase the homes, which ultimately is taking over the loan, the current loan. So I'll let Rachel talk about that. And then after Rachel, we'll take a quick break. Well, actually, Rachel's going to open up for questions give you a few minutes to ask questions as well. But afterwards, we're also going to take just a quick break before we're introducing Dave Degnan from Degnan Horn, which is a real estate attorney firm here in the Valley. And Dave's going to be talking to us about some of the things that he's seeing in the real estate market on the legal side. Just because we all know that we follow the rules to keep ourselves out of trouble. So it's always nice to have an attorney tell us what some of the other agents are falling into right now. And then from 11 to 11:30 is going to be me talking to you a little bit about the buyer's market and what that really means to you. I know you've been hearing it out there a lot, like it's buyer's market, it's a buyer's market. This area is going into a buyer's market. But what does that really mean to you? And how does that help you or what do you need to know to be successful in this market? So we're going to be talking about that this afternoon. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel Roberts over at UME Assumptions. And Rachel is going to give us an insight of their company and how they've been able to help us in the past. So Rachel.
Yes, Earl, thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, good morning, everyone. So assumptions, yes, that's what we do. But that's not all we do. We got into the assumption industry about 2.5 years ago. So we're UME Assumption Specialists, and we are a mortgage company that drives the assumption processing. So we have a ton of mortgage experience. So let me tell you a little bit about, I have about 15 minutes to teach you about 4 hours worth of information. So I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible, but ultimately, assumptions are back. it took a while for agents to really want to embrace the assumption. We've been trying for about 2.5 years to get agents to embrace it. But now that agents are uncomfortable, they're willing to hear something new. Investors were the first to show up, and I did say investors. So let me kind of lead into that. All government loans are assumable. What that means is you could essentially, as a buyer, qualify to take over the seller's existing loan. If there's 26 years left on it, you take over the 26-year balance. That means that seller has paid 4 years worth of interest, and you get to take over the most important part, the really low interest rate. So, when I said government loans, that covers FHA, it covers VA, and it covers USDA. Those are all government loans that are assumable. So USDA, not super attractive. So we're never really going to touch on USDA. We're going to touch primarily on FHA and VA. So FHA is super easy. It's straightforward. It's primary residence only. So that leaves VA. And I did say investors. Investors showed up about 1.5 years ago because investors can assume VA loans. And that's a little confusing because you would think that in order to participate in VA financing, you would have to either be an active duty member or a veteran. And when it comes to an assumption, you can be anybody. You do not need to be an active duty member or a veteran to assume a VA loan, nor do you need to intend to occupy it as your primary residence. So with that being said, investors showed up first because investors self-educate, and primary resident buyers generally rely on you guys, the agents, to teach them about creative ways to get into a home. And I would say real estate agents got super uncomfortable after all the loan officers that they do business with kept promising them that rates would drop, and that didn't happen. And so the mantra was survive till 25. And guess what? It's 2025 and rates have not dropped. Therefore, there's a lot of discomfort in the real estate market. Agents are super uncomfortable, and now they're finally seeking other options, which assumptions are a great feature. They were a great feature 2.5 years ago, and they still are. It's just a matter of understanding it and not overcomplicating an assumption. So, we do hold classes in the Valley. We just broke into the Denver market, and Denver's exploding with assumptions as well. It's really great for home affordability. And so we really encourage everyone to go to our website. It's www.umeprojects.com. And if you go to the resources tab, you won't see very many classes right now because we're heading into summer and attendance is generally low in the summer, but we will start back up in-person classes in August. So we'll list those classes. They're 4-hour classes. There's so much to learn, the nuances. But right now, most importantly, before you get to a class, I kind of want to help you understand and the behaviors that we're seeing. So right now, psychologically as a buyer, and Earl did mention that it is a buyer's market, but rates are high. I don't think that rates are high. I've been doing this for 25 years. I think rates are at a normal, kind of place in the market. Rates being at 2.5%, 3.5%, that was abnormal. That's not a normal market. But psychologically, the buyer right now believes that rates are high. So even engaging a buyer right now, it's somewhat difficult and it's intimidating because getting them past interest rate is the number one hurdle and the number one objection. But if you use the assumption as a marketing first step, use it as marketing. Don't overcomplicate it. Let them know that there's other options just to get them to engage. That's all your goal is. How do I get a buyer to engage and give them something outside of the interest rate? You're giving them a solution. Whether they use the assumption or not, it doesn't matter. You want to get them to engage. Say, hey, I can get you a lower monthly payment by $1,000 potentially. I could get you a low interest rate, 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%. Let's talk about it. So from there, what we do is we handle and we facilitate the successful closing of an assumption. But most importantly, we perform what's called a dual approval. So you get the buyer to engage with us. They would apply. just like traditional financing. And what we do is we provide them with a new financing approval and an assumption approval so that we can engage with them and get them past interest rate, because we start talking about monthly payment and it's no longer about interest rate. And so we can measure for them how much they qualify for traditional new financing and how much they qualify for an assumption. And we call that a dual approval. And once they're engaged, they're no longer worried about interest rate because they understand the numbers. And I would say half the time they do go down the assumption road, and the other half, they go down the new financing road, which they never would have normally gone down because they were so afraid of interest rate, but we converted it to monthly payment and it helped them understand the numbers better. So ultimately, there's no difference in commission for a real estate agent in an assumption situation versus traditional financing. It's identical with this small exception that assumptions do take a little longer, but it's a buyer's market and sellers are willing to wait about 70 days on average to close on an assumption. So you have to wait a little longer for your paycheck, but at least you're getting a paycheck at this point. Other things about assumptions, there are nuances. So I really encourage you to reach out to us. We do hold a Q&A, every Tuesday and Thursday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Zoom. You can send your buyers there if they're interested. You can send your sellers there. You can jump on, listen to the questions and answers until you get yourself to a class. And then if you're a listing agent that has a listing with government financing attached to us, go to our website. You'll see that you can search every listing right now that has an assumable loan. It is on our website. It's a mini MLS for assumptions. Send us in your mortgage statement. Send it to Mike at UME Projects because we need to get him some more work, and I see his name up on the screen. So send him in the mortgage statement so we can certify your property and message to your peers in the community that you have an assumable property. So I would say that's assumptions in a nutshell. Our fee, really quick, we do charge 1% of the purchase price to be paid at the closing table upon successful closing. That's to the buyer. However, just like any other closing cost, it can be negotiated. So that's assumptions in a nutshell. And I'm going to open it up for Q&A for anybody that has questions.
Does anyone have anything for Ms. Rachel?
I will say this, if you don't have any questions, Cody Ramirez, follow him on socials. He's a real estate agent. He's 24 years old. He's super impressive. You'll be able to see the type of marketing that Cody does as a real estate agent. He closed, I want to say, over 50 assumption transactions last year. He's probably closed 30 plus year to date, and he has probably 17 under contract.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, his goal wasn't to be an assumption specialist, but to engage with people. And his marketing helped him engage with buyers and sellers to the point where he's super successful with it. Now, he doesn't want to be an assumption specialist forever. I mean, if he ends up being one, great. But what's starting to happen for him is people that are closing on these assumptions, friends and family, are hearing about the success story about how their agent got them a 2.5% interest rate, a 3% interest rate. So it's no longer about the assumption anymore. He's starting to get listings, referrals, friends, family, and not all of them are assumptions. He's just recently in the past month received 3 multi-million-dollar referrals for buyers, and they're not interested in an assumption. So, you know, it's starting to work. He's starting to really expand past the assumption, but assumptions are helping him be successful in this market right now.
Yeah.
Follow him on social. He's great.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you said that assumptions are coming back around. I remember talking to a family on a house in the 80s when interest rates were at 13%, 14%. And they shared with me that they actually purchased their home here in Glendale doing an assumption. They were able to take over the current owner's loan. So it's not something that's necessarily new, but it's new to our market just because we haven't had to use them in so long. So
Right.
it's comforting to know that there is a company out there that can help, because, you know, most of us, I mean, I got into real estate in 2015. I had never seen an assumption before.
Right.
But prior to me getting into real estate, that this was something that was commonplace in the past. So I definitely think it's something that should be utilized, and especially with those of us that have the privilege of having those 2%, like you said, that 2 and 3% is never coming back. That's a rarity. But some of those homes that they're able to assume have those rates. So
They do.
Yeah, it might be a possibility. So I know, and I don't know if anyone else has questions, but I know that you said it takes about 70 days to close. Are there any challenges that you're seeing out there with the buyers as far as during that 70-day process? Maybe that the banks are pushing you back, or any challenges that you're seeing?
So you're probably not going to want to hear this because brokers don't really enjoy prepossession. But every market bears a different behavior, right?
Right.
And right now in this market, because assumptions are so popular, we're closing about 30 of these a month, and we're continuing to grow with awareness, because this doesn't work unless people understand it and spread the word. So prepossession is something that we're seeing quite a bit of, simply because the seller wants to move on, and the buyer wants to move in before the 70 days. And so, some brokers choose to handle it differently. They prefer a lease because the lease ends at a specific time. So then, you can have the buyer vacate should the assumption not go through for a reason. So usually we're seeing a lot of 60-day leases versus prepossession, but that's generally how a lot of people are solving it. The other piece of it is that we see buyers are willing to make the seller's mortgage payment after 60 days because it is a burden on the seller. Yeah. But like you said, it's a buyer's market. So sellers are willing to participate in these transactions more than ever. I would say a year ago, it was a lot more of a challenge to get a seller to participate, but now it's not a problem whatsoever.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, one thing I do want to mention, since we have a little bit more time, is that there's a myth out there. You're going to see a lot of negative, social posts. It takes too long. Well, if you're getting a good interest rate, hey, why not wait the extra time? And if you're able to sell your house, so it takes too long, it's just not really applicable in this market, right? The other part of it is that, they're like, well, you have to come in with a down payment. Well, with traditional financing, you generally have to come in with a down payment. But let's talk about the down payment for a minute. We can use secondary financing to help with a lot of the what we call the delta, or the gap, the difference between the purchase price and that assumed loan. So generally, you want a buyer with 10% down. However, we do have 5% down options available. So, this isn't a down payment assistance type, no down payment type program. You do need at least 5 to 10% down, but people have it. People will come up with it. Financial advisors will tell someone to draw from their 401k to get that really low rate. They're the first ones to say, do it. Right. So just be mindful when you're watching socials and it's negative. 90% of the time, you'll find that it's a loan officer saying something negative, because loan officers are not involved in an assumption. They don't make any money. There is zero commission for a loan officer. So every time an assumption closes, that's a loan officer losing a transaction. So most of the negative press that you see is from a loan officer. Mm-hmm. And then you'll probably get off this call and ask your loan officer, is this real? And they're going to probably not know much about it or say something negative about it, simply because they don't want to lose a deal. But assumptions are fantastic. We're seeing people save, like one guy bought a house about a couple of months ago, and he's going to save $700,000 in interest over the life of the loan. So this is major savings, major savings. So don't be afraid to lean on us. Ask us questions, call us. The team line is 602-715-2875. If you don't want to ask questions on this Zoom call or this whatever chat it is, call us. We're happy to do one-on-one and really go in more depth, but get yourself to a class more than anything.
Okay. Brian, you have a question?
Rachel, I have one question.
Sure.
Are listing agents or sellers, when they're offering such a low rate, like we talked about, Earl talked about 2-3%, are they pricing that rate into the sales price?
Great question. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of that simply because it's so new that listing agents don't really understand. And I think the market in general doesn't understand the value of an assumption. Until there's enough awareness and enough data, it's kind of hard to put that value. But I think that as we get smarter as a community, yes, they will start. But I will tell you, there's houses that will sell for $50,000 to $75,000. We've seen it more than ask because of that low rate. It just depends. And I can help you guys measure the value to the best of my ability. But to give you an example, if you have a $500,000 house with a $100,000 loan, that's a $400,000 difference in down payment. Like that $100,000 loan is just not significant enough. It's only really probably worth marketing dollars, right? We can market your home as an assumption and gain more attention. However, if you have a $500,000 house with a $450,000 loan at 2.5%, you're probably going to get close to ask price, if not maybe more. So it's just a matter of we're learning how to measure that and build it into the market.
Thank you. Yeah.
So it looks like Nicole O'Reilly has raised a hand.
I actually just wanted to mention, out in Surprise, I actually just viewed a property that sold $30,000 over asking because it had a 2.75% assumable mortgage.
Yeah.
And it's messing with everybody else's comps, unfortunately, because you can't use that as a comp because of the interest rate.
You're right. And that was something we considered about 2.5 years ago. But appraisers, anytime we reached out to an appraiser 2.5 years ago, they just said they can't use it as a comp simply because, it depends on the comments as well, right? But they did sell for over because of that low price. But I will say this, as a listing agent, my recommendation is I wouldn't build the cost of the assumption into the price of the home because you might have a buyer that doesn't need the assumption, right? So we're always recommending that you price it for both traditional and an assumption. And if the assumption really is valuable, their loan is valuable, the buyers are going to drive up that price beyond the ask price like Nicole saw in Surprise. So that's generally what we are seeing as best practice.
Okay. So I remember at some point in the market where it was kind of a seller's market, and if you had an ideal home in an area, you could list your home, but almost advertise it as pay me to get me out of my house. So if my comps are 800, but I wanted an offer at 950 and I have an assumable, am I just thinking crazy? Because I would almost advertise, say, if it's my personal residence and you want my house, that I can give you this rate, but I'm going to price in that equity for that rate.
Yeah.
And you have to pay me to get me out of my house. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but that's where I was thinking with that. So
yeah, another behavior that we're seeing, and it's starting to work, we get about 5 to 10 applications a day. And like the past week, I would say maybe 3 weeks, we're seeing a lot of sellers that are just wanting to hold on to their low rate. And so starting that conversation with potential sellers, hey, I know you're hanging on to your low rate, but they're not super happy with the house that they live in. They just don't want to give up their low rate. Teaching them about the assumption and letting them know they can go get another low rate. So, and a good example of someone we're helping right now is they've got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and now they've just had their 5th child and they really need an extra bedroom. But in order to go get an extra bedroom in their same neighborhood, they're going to have to go to 7% interest rates, which is going to cost them an extra $1,000 for an extra bedroom. But if we teach them about the assumption, you're going to get the listing on that. And then you're also going to get the buy on that. So getting these sellers to realize that they have other options and they don't have to, be stuck with a 7% interest rate. And these sellers have equity. So, the seller is really what we think is the biggest target right now. Get them to sell and to buy through the assumption.
That's awesome. I guess I've never thought about doing it that way. Because I feel like a lot of the sellers feel like they're home locked, like they can't leave this rate. So
exactly.
So
Nicole raised her hand again. I like Nicole. Keep raising your hand. I like your information.
I actually have a question. So are you seeing, because of our NAR settlement, whether the seller is still contributing to the buyer's agent's compensation with the assumable loan, or are we seeing buyers actually having to pay their own compensation?
We're seeing it's normal. Sellers are paying for the compensation. They are. Yeah. The only time it gets a little tricky, Nicole, and everyone else is like, for example, let's just say there's a $500,000 property with a $500,000 loan on it. So there really is no down payment, but then you're still going to have closing costs. And then you have, real estate agent compensation on both sides. So who's really going to pay for that? So that's really kind of when it gets a little tricky, but those transactions do exist so that you could find a zero down, but your buyer's going to have to pay for compensation and closing costs. But other than that, we are seeing sellers predominantly pay for buyers agents compensation.
And I think the team would love to know, because I know that you guys have been able to get paid from the actual bank. Can you explain that to the team as well? Because I think that helps with some people's nerves, because they're like, okay, well, how are you making money if normal lenders don't know how to do this?
Sure. So we charge that 1% fee, 1% of the purchase price, and that includes everything. It includes consulting, how to write the contract, how to execute the assumption addendum, maybe educating the listing agent who doesn't know about assumptions or isn't even aware that they have an assumable loan. We get on the phone and we call the seller and teach them about entitlement on VA, which I didn't discuss because that's a deep conversation for a class. So the buyer pays our fee. It's very rare that a bank will pay our fee. It does happen, but we don't advertise that because it's inconsistent and unreliable. But ultimately, the closing costs overall for an assumption are less, even with our fee, than traditional financing closing costs. So a buyer's going to pay closing costs, whether or not it's an assumption or traditional financing. And with our fee, we're less altogether than traditional financing. It's a no-brainer. Does that answer your question, Nicole?
Yeah, I've actually, I introduced Brian and Earl to UME a few years back.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I just remember that I know you guys had one processing company that was actually paying
Yes.
for your fee, which was pretty rad.
Yeah, that would be Rocket Mortgage. It's a hit or miss, but sometimes on occasion they do pay for it, but advertising, it's tough. But yes, it was amazing, and it was a bonus more than anything.
And the only thing I did want to mention is when it comes to VA, if you have a VA buyer and they want to assume a VA loan, that's the one time that it's entitlement is really not an issue.
It's not. You are exactly right. Yes. And so, I really encourage everyone to get on a call tomorrow at 9 and ask questions about VA entitlement if you want to know more, because we have a full hour and we can really go in more depth. Mike will be the one that would be teaching about it.
Nice. Well, Rachel, I would definitely encourage everyone to hop on that call tomorrow. And Rachel, I don't know when your next class is going to be, but I would definitely encourage all the agents to get out to one of those classes. I have personally attended my class in the past. And,
Me too.
And yeah, Brian and I, and it was a great class. I learned a lot about assumptions, and I definitely think this is a benefit for both our buyers and sellers at this point. So we'll get a schedule together with the next upcoming classes. And Rachel, I'll reach out and actually obtain the information for the call tomorrow, and I'll send it out to all the agents so maybe they can hop on tomorrow to ask additional questions. But I just wanted to let you know we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join
absolutely.
us, and it really means a lot to us. And hopefully the information that was provided today would provide more business your way as well, just because
Wonderful.
I do think this is a great tool for all the agents to use. So thank you again for your time.
Yes. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Earl. And thank you, everyone who listened to me rant about assumptions. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And we will be in touch. Actually, I'll reach out to you after this call just to get the schedule of the classes and the times and the information for the call tomorrow.
And
Sounds good.
we'll be sure to share it with everybody.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Rachel.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that was great information, guys. I'm so glad she was able to join us. And now we have another special treat for us this morning. Mr. Dave Degnan from Degnan and Horn Law Offices is here with us to talk a little bit about what he what he's seeing out in the real estate market from the legal side. I know he's a super busy man, so the fact that he was able to get on with us this morning means a lot to us. So, Mr. Degnan, I'll let you take over, sir.
Awesome. Well, thank you. As Earl said, my name is David Degnan. I'm a real estate attorney in town. I litigate probably 200 disputes at any given time among myself and 7 or 8 attorneys that work for me. But what I'm here today to talk about it is really 2 types of things that I wanted to make sure you understand. And the first is the first question I get is, as an investor, what do I do? How do I be a new investor? And I wanted to speak about this a little bit because it pertains to your ability as agents to get new clients and to understand what your investors are looking for and what they're asking me about. So you know what to talk to them about it and what they're looking for. And second, I wanted to kind of walk through some of the realtor risk I see in the marketplace right now and kind of walk through the types of transactions to look at the type of risk that you're likely to see. And with people trying to do different creative things in the marketplace and how, and perhaps why your broker is, excited about some transactions and probably less than thrilled about other transactions. So first, let's talk about, when an investor comes to you, what is the investor thinking about? And I guess this goes back a little bit to real estate school, and this is coming from someone who owns a bunch of rental properties. So, and the realtor is interested in the numbers. And so if the numbers don't work, and if we can't tell them that, hey, this property, it has a rental income of X and the mortgage is going to be Y, and the mortgage is, I have a rental property that has a mortgage of $1,000 more than the what I get for my rent, then the investor's not going to be excited about that case. But if you have a property in Scottsdale that rents $4,000 a month and it's only, $350,000 to buy the condo, then all of a sudden there's cash flow there and you can pick up the phone and there's any number of people that you get a potential buyer from. So think about your numbers when you start. The other thing that's good to talk about when you're dealing with investors is this idea of asset protection. And when a realtor wants to, or excuse me, when a investor wants to buy property, they're really, once they have enough properties, they're really starting to think, okay, well, I want to protect my personal assets. I want to say, okay, I have my personal stuff, my personal family accounts and everything else. And now, well, what if I get sued? Well, if you only have one property that's in the LLC and somebody sues the LLC for something and the loan is you're completely encumbered with a loan, well, there's really nothing to sue anymore. And so as you talk to some of the asset protection attorneys, what you'll find is that there's this concept of layering your asset protection. And, if you only have one property, your risk may not be that high. But if you start to have 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 properties, you start to talk about wanting more and more levels of asset protection to protect against the one tenant that has mold or the dog bite or the independent contractor that fell off the ladder and it's not covered by insurance. And then what do you do? How do you make sure that they're covered? And how do you make sure that you are asking the right questions to your potential investor so that you get the deal? And you know who the deal's with. Is the deal with the LLC? Is the deal with them personally? How are they structuring their assets? Some of these questions are really important to start thinking about as you go into those listing meetings where you're saying, okay, well, I want to be the guy to sell the next 6 houses you have. But if I'm not asking the questions or understanding what asset protection is, then they're going to start talking about something else and you're not going to understand what they're doing or why they're doing it, or even who is there to help them when they start talking about these questions with their trust and how does their trust, is this property properly in their trust? And, these are things that you're going to want to talk to your title company about too, to make sure that you're getting the right person on your listing agreement to sell the property. And we're seeing that a lot is where the wrong parties are on the listing contract. And so the listing contract has to be amended because really the property is owned by the trust or the LLC that is owned by the trust and not quite the person you're putting on that. And so it's just something to watch out for. But generally, when we think of asset protection, we think of it in 3 or 4 separate layers. The first layer is the property itself in an LLC. And an LLC is simply a limited liability company that you put an asset in and use to protect the asset from some unknown risk in the future. And by itself, there's this idea that, and if you put the asset into an LLC, then the only thing, if I were to sue that LLC, the only thing I could recover are the assets of the LLCs after its liabilities. And so what that means is if you have $1 million property and it has a $950,000 loan, then the only thing I would be able to recover if I sued that LLC and got a judgment is whatever equity is left in the property. And if you think about it, if it's fully encumbered by a first mortgage and I'm getting a judgment lien after it, to the point where the property is over encumbered, you just thumb your nose at the guy that sued you and say, sorry, there's nothing here. There's nothing to collect. But as you get more of those LLCs, it becomes important to, and more properties, it becomes important to, number one, make sure you're doing it correctly and treating those as businesses. So you have separate bank accounts, a separate address, a separate PO box or something, anything to make sure it's separate from you personally, so they can't pierce the corporate veil. But then you'll see a second layer of protection, which is generally a general partnership. And the general partnership is one that effectively acts as the property manager, so to speak. We don't call it that, but that's effectively what it is. They're the ones that coordinate maintenance and repairs and make sure the clocks run on time and the lease payments get made and everything else. They put that second layer in the general partnership, especially if you have other partners that are running the investment, in there because they want a buffer layer between the actual LLC itself and the trust that generally it flows to, because generally you have flow to a revocable than an irrevocable trust when you're doing these type of these bigger investors that have a lot of assets. And the reason they do that is they're trying to say, okay, well, if you get past the LLC, if you're able to pierce the corporate veil, then, okay, we're going to go to the general partnership. And if you can get past the general partnership, good luck trying to get into my trust. And then the trust has other assets that get pushed to the revocable trust. So the point is if you layer the asset protection so that they know here's kind of what we're looking at, here's what we're doing, and it becomes much more difficult for a lawyer like me to get to money for my clients. And so when I see a scheme like this set up and a tenant comes to me and says, hey, I was exposed to mold in the property, and I look at it and it's AZ LLC 1 that has owned by a general partnership, and the general partnership's owned by a trust. And you can see there's a deed of trust that's recorded. I say we can sue for $300,000, and even if you win, the likelihood of you recovering something in this case is very slim. Now, there are some other risks to doing this kind of asset protection strategy. Of you run into a situation where you have, you're too risk adverse, and so it's kind of like a pendulum swinging the other way. In that there's a lot of legal work that has to be done to create these structures, and there's a lot of accounting work that has to be done to maintain these structures. So, it's kind of a risk reward thing. But really, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is when you are approaching investors, that you fundamentally understand what asset protection is on a most basic level. And so you can speak to them or know who to refer them to speak to them. So you get the listing, not only this listing, but the 6 other listings that are going to come in the next year and a half as they start to deleverage and move away from their asset protection thing as the market picks up again. And that's important to me for you guys, I suppose, because I want you to get all 6 listings. That's my goal of, speaking to you today, is to say, all right, if you have that investor that has 4, 6, 10 properties, and they, and they're trying to unload all 6 over the next 10 years, well, we got to talk about what that looks like and what their asset protection structure looks like, because it may be a little more complicated to sell all those properties over the year. And it's more of a longer conversation that you have to have with them about why their asset protection is set up this way, what's the risk they're avoiding. Obviously this is the basic level, the 3 or 4 levels of the LLC, the general partnership, and the trust. That's the most basic level. If you talk to some of the asset protection people out there, they will come up with some convoluted thing that, it weaves in and out and nobody can understand it, And so the reason I mentioned that is because every time you take it to a new asset protection attorney to ask them if this is correct, they will find a way to tell you it's the dumbest asset protection and you're totally exposed and at risk because they want to redraft everything at the cost of $30,000. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm not telling you need more than that. What I'm telling you is just so you understand that what asset protection attorneys are doing and why they're doing it. So you know how to talk to the client when you go in and pitch them for all 6 of their listings over the next 2 years, or how to get more listings from them as they grow their portfolio to 15 or 20 or 50. And so those are things to start thinking about, is just how they're structuring their assets. Just so you guys understand what you're talking about when you're dealing with somebody that has 4, 6, 10, 100 properties and what that looks like as we try to protect those 100 properties. And so without going, I don't want to go too far on that because I know my time's limited. I just wanted to give you guys a flavor of, some of what my investor clients are coming in and talking to me about. So you understand that, because I think a lot of the marketing that I see in the marketplace is geared towards, how do I get those first-time home buyers? How do I get the down payment assistance? But I think there's a real lack of people going after those clients with 6 and 8 properties that want to sell or buy the next 10 properties. And those are the people with money. So those are the people I want you to target. And I want you to understand that so you guys understand how to get to the next level in your real estate career. So switching gears a little bit, the first part of this presentation, I wanted to spend talking about how to target some of those investors. The second part of the presentation, I wanted to speak a little bit more about where I'm seeing realtor risk. And what I see is generally when we talk about the risk as it relates to agents, aside from maybe non-disclosure things, and you represented someone in a prior transaction, and now you know all this information about the property, and the classic example is Open Door. And sorry to, if anybody represents Open Door, they had a property that, they know about something, and then the next guy buys the property and they don't disclose something else. That was my most recent case, so I apologize. I shouldn't talk out of school too much, but I apologize. But short of that, what I want to speak to a little bit is the type of transactions that are out there in the marketplace and what that looks like and what to watch out for. Because the risk to you as agents is you get caught in a lawsuit and you're caught defending your actions on a backwards facing approach, meaning you're looking at a transaction that you did 2 years ago, not focused on all your marketing efforts to get all those good investors. And so really, when we talk about the type of risk you see, a lot of the risk relates to the initial type of transaction you have. And what you're probably most comfortable handling is the traditional real estate transaction. And what happens there is, I want to buy a property, so I go to a bank and I get a bank to loan me money, and I pay some too, and I pay the full price with the help of a bank. In exchange, I get, there's a purchase contract and I get a deed to the property. I am now the owner of that property. That is what you see every day in the traditional real estate transaction. But it's only one of probably 5 or 6 different ways that real estate is being transacted these days. And so, I guarantee you, if you go to your broker and say, hey, I got a purchase contract for, $500,000 and that's a good price and the client agrees, I guarantee he's going to let you do the transaction that way because that's the most common. And Earl, if I'm wrong, just hop on and let me know. But that's how probably 90% of real estate's done. But as you get into the different types of transactions, we start to see different levels of risk. And when you get more creative with the financing or get more creative when you deliver the deed and things like that, you start to see different types of risk pop up and different risks to the brokerages. And I guess what I mean by that is the traditional sale is what we just talked about. The one you probably see second most is what's called a carryback financing. And what that means is you're buying a property and but they are not going to a bank or a third party or paying it out of their own piggy bank to buy this property. They're paying $100,000 down and they're saying, seller, I would like you to lend me $400,000. And, and they lend it out of the equity in the property. So really no money's changing hands per se, in that I'm not handing them $400,000 of cash for me to lend it back. But what you're really doing is making sure that for you agents, I want you to understand your seller is taking the risk of the lender. They're stepping in the shoes of the lender. And what I see most often is if you're going to act like and be Chase Bank, you better do the underwriting like Chase Bank and be comfortable understanding the underwriting like Chase Bank. And 99% of the transactions that cross my desk, as for a lawyer review, the seller is nowhere near sophisticated enough to understand or do the type of underwriting necessary for a carryback deal. Meaning they don't pull credit, they don't have personal guarantees if it's an LLC, they don't do underwriting to see if the borrower's defaulted or filed bankruptcy or something. They don't, and if they don't do that, guess who they look at? Guess who when the deal blows up later because the lender can't, because the lender now is getting not getting their money and they can't really get the property and the property is destroyed now down the road, and they'll look to the realtor because they'll say, realtor, why didn't you tell me to consult an attorney? Why didn't you tell me to consult a loan professional to advise me about how carryback agreements and what due diligence I should have done? And I'm not saying they're right in going after the realtor, but they do go after the realtor a lot of times because the realtor is the one that has money. And you're their agent, and as their agent and telling them they should do this transaction that has a carryback component to them, and it's just, that's an area of risk. And so if you have a client, and this happens a lot, and certainly in business transactions where, there would be a huge carryback component. And that's fine if you have $50,000 of cash flow every month coming in on the business to do a carryback where you can get paid out of the recurring revenue. But on a traditional rental property where the margins are very slim, if there's a loan, it just, a lot of times, especially in this market, where we're seeing a lot of hard money lenders being not happy when properties are holding on the market for too long. We're seeing a lot of carryback deals go bad, and they go bad significantly because the seller is either not sophisticated enough to do the due diligence or doesn't know what due diligence a bank officer does before agreeing to a carryback deal. And so when you're presented with these type of carryback deals, all I would say is, you have to present them to your client. But when you do, you're probably going to want to notify your broker that this is a non-traditional transaction. Please notify your broker. Your broker wants to be involved especially with those harder transactions where there's potentially more risk to the brokerage. And again, if I'm wrong, let me know. But make sure that you're having your client either meet with an attorney or somebody else so they understand exactly what due diligence is necessary for you to do that transaction correctly. The third type of transaction, and with a carryback loan that goes along, the deed is transferred immediately, just like with a traditional sale. The deed is transferred immediately. The third type of transaction that we're seeing right now where the deed is transferred immediately, but the underlying transaction is a little more difficult, is what's called a subject to or a wrap transaction. Now, I will tell you, in speaking with some of the lawyers that do this a little more often than I do, the Department of Real Estate and candidly, the Attorney General's office is taking a very, very grim view of subject to transactions, and they are not recommended by my law firm under any circumstance. That doesn't mean people don't do them still. And sometimes the business decision, the legal decision may not move forward. Nicole, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention two things real quick. So when it comes to seller carryback, even with title, as far as Great American Title is concerned, we actually bring in a third party to manage the carryback.
Okay.
Just so we're helping to protect our agents as well. And then when it comes to the subject to, otherwise known as a wrap, there is very few escrow officers, even within Great American, that will touch them.
And just so everyone kind of understands, the subject to means you are selling the seller is selling the property subject to and keeping in place the existing mortgage. And so the mortgage stays the same and it just a new person's paying it. The reason these transactions are so scary is because the seller is intentionally breaching its contract, and effectively what's called a due on sale clause, the hold notes due and payable upon sale, when you do one of these transactions. And so you are intentionally breaching the contract. And so when you do that, you have to know that. And it's not just the due on sale clause and that's what, if someone's trying to sell you on some product, that's not really what the risk is as much as anything to me, because the risk of that is that you have a property that, is ultimately gets, the mortgage becomes called and you have to refinance it. But from a realtor's perspective, there's also significant liability that your insurance probably won't cover. In cases where, for example, if the property has a fire or a flood. The problem is that I had a case with one of the mortgage companies, and the mortgage company was given the check for $400,000 for the fire, and the mortgage company was saying, this is made out to somebody that's not our client, not the owner. And so I got on the phone with them to try to, massage the situation and get the check and get the property rebuilt. And the loan officer's general counsel said, we're just going to keep the $400,000. You can sue us and you'd probably win, but take your best shot, because I don't know what to do here. And so we're just going to keep the $400,000, and you're going to be left with a property that is completely fire damaged, and the loan officer is just going to use it to pay down his loan, because he doesn't trust, because he knows you breached the contract and can't sue him for the return of that money. And so it's one of these weird situations, and you put yourself in this situation down the line with extraordinary risk, because then we come back in the lawsuit that follows that, and everybody wants to point the finger at the realtor because they're the ones with a big E&O policy, to say, oh, realtor, you should have known that this transaction was illegal, and you allowed us, and your broker signed off on us entering into a transaction that the Department of Real Estate is now saying is illegal. And so, the defense, and as their attorneys do the best they can, of course. But it's just the point I'm making in all of this is the farther you get away from a traditional transaction where the bank is paying money and you're paying all the money in exchange for a deed up front, the farther you get away from that, the more risk there is to you and the brokerage. And so when people have these creative deals, and I wanted to go through a couple of these on purpose, when people have these creative financing deals and creative ways in which they can make you a ton of money and make you a real estate investor where you're going to do well, they don't always work out. And a matter of fact, in many cases, they work out very poorly. And we're seeing a lot of of that happening right now. And so I want to at least clue you guys into some of that, where the farther you go away, the more risk there is to you as a brokerage and as a realtor, and to you even personally when these lawsuits come along. So those are the three basic the regular traditional transaction, the carryback transaction, and the subject to transaction. Those are the traditional transactions where you get the deed immediately, pursuant to a wrap or a purchase contract or a carryback addendum or something. There are other transactions being done out there where you do not get the deed immediately. And you get the deed either when you pay for the property under either a rent to own or a contract for deed, and we'll talk about that in a minute, or you get the property with at least the option to purchase. And these are a little more nuanced transactions, but the problem is the forms that are out there right now that most people are using are extremely bad. And I wrote an article about this in the Arizona Journal of Real Estate and Business. But a lot of times the problem we have with lease with options to purchase is it's really three contracts that they try to mush into one contract. It's a lease agreement, it's an option agreement, and it's a purchase agreement. And you only get the purchase once you exercise your option. But those are three separate contracts and must be distinct contracts, because otherwise you get situations like what happens if you evict someone under a lease agreement, but they have an option to purchase that hasn't been nullified. And so effectively we put a cloud on the title for 8 years, even though you've evicted them. So what is that? So you have a property you effectively can't really do anything with because you helped them get into at least the option to purchase or gave them a bad contract. And all of a sudden, for some reason, your brokerage is being sued. And so just understand that you have really good AAR forms for a lease. You have really, really good AAR forms for a purchase, and separate option agreements. The thing about an option agreement that I wanted to make clear is options must be definite in duration, time, and manner. Meaning, you are paying $1,000 in exchange for a 2-year option to purchase this property for this. I would not recommend that any of you write option agreements because it's really easy to do them wrong and it's really easy to mess up. Now, can you do purchase contracts? Absolutely, any day of the week. Can you do lease agreements? Absolutely, with your lender's approval, with your broker's approval. But the point is that those AAR forms for those, but don't just lump it all in a one agreement and put it in, the 8A section of your purchase contract. I see that far, far, far too often, where you're trying to draft a new contract in section 8A. Don't do that. Don't put bills of sale in 8A. Don't, just understand that those are separate contracts generally. And the more you lump into one, the more you're creating problems that you don't know exist yet. Just because, you're not expected to be experts on contract drafting when you're drafting those separate agreements. I guess what I'll also say to that effect is on contract drafting is know what you're drafting. If there's a lot of properties on the market right now that only show renderings and it's really raw land, and you're working with a builder, do a new home contract, have them have their contract. Don't use a residential resale purchase contract and try to make it a new contract. Don't do it. Talk to your broker, please. I beg you, because the litigation on, using a new home contract or a residential resale contract to do new home construction for something that's going to be built in 2 or 3 years, it's just something completely different. And just understand that there's a lot of those out there right now where there's, especially like in Desert Hills or Cave Creek, where there's just renderings of the property and there's nothing there. Don't try to use the resale contract for new home construction. Ask them if they have it. Talk to your broker. Your broker probably has a lot of tools for those type of things, but don't use a resale contract just to get it under contract. Just be very careful. I want you to get your commission, obviously, and make sure that we can figure out how you get paid, but don't do it to a point that you're going to end up in a 2-year litigation. Really, in my last one, it was a 4-year litigation over that precise issue, is they used the wrong contract and then it wasn't built right. And, they were saying it was supposed to be given immediately, and it wasn't given immediately because it still had to be constructed. And the contract was just so vague, and, because it was the wrong contract. It was a resale contract. It wasn't a new home contract. So just understand when you're working with builders and you're trying to buy, or your client's trying to buy a home that really all they're showing on MLS is renderings, that you got to talk to your broker and understand what to do in those situations, because it comes up. There's one in my neighborhood that it's all renderings about the $3 million home they want to build there for you, but don't use a residential resale contract to try to buy that. It will end up poorly, I promise you, even in the best of cases. Okay, that was a little divergence on what we see when we're talking about drafting contracts, and specifically lease with option to purchase contracts. Really all I'm saying there is make sure you have 3 separate contracts, because it's 3 separate deals. And understand that, and tell you that you could lose out on one deal and still win on another. You still can exercise your option to purchase, even if you're evicted under some circumstances. So just know that there are 3 deals, so there are 3 separate sets of risk. And if you're jumping into those type of transactions, you're jumping into a new type of risk. And, again, if you're going away from a purchase transaction that is anyway normal, talk to your broker about it. Make sure your broker is going to allow you to do it, because many brokers don't let their realtors do these type of transactions, and say, not my broker, not happening, not now, no way. And I see him smiling, so I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but
No, you're absolutely right. Protection of the agents and the brokerage is at top of mind at all costs, and ultimately we're protecting the agent.
Right. And so with a lease with option to purchase, you're not getting the deed, not getting ownership rights immediately. You're getting a lease, and you have an option agreement, which kind of gives you an equitable right to purchase the property at some specific price at some point in the future. The advantage of this is, what I'm seeing a lot of is 10 years ago, people entered these lease with option to purchase. If you had the option to purchase a Scottsdale property for $300,000, and you exercise that option today, the person that has to give up that option and has to give you that property for $300,000 is probably going to try to find every which way possible to say you didn't properly exercise that option, or you breached the underlying lease agreement, so they don't want to do it now. So we're seeing a lot of litigation like that, where if there's these long option agreement periods, that there's huge equity in the property now that wasn't probably contemplated at the time they did the lease with option to purchase. And what I'll say is, when I practice law, unfortunately, a lot of my practice of law is defensive. And what that means is that when I have emails to the client, certainly there's a way that you can upload your communications with the client to SkySlope or whatever program you're using. Just make sure that if you're, make sure as a safety mechanisms, when people are doing these transactions, that say, look, I'm good at real estate. I am good at bringing a buyer and seller together. But when you're doing these transactions, please speak with an attorney. Please speak with somebody else. You don't have to give my name. I don't care which attorney you use. Just make sure you're covering your own. And so there's a safety valve, because I would guess 50% of all my cases where I've sued realtors in the past 10 years would go away if there was something in the file that says, this is outside the scope of my expertise, or there's this issue here which you need to work through. I need you to speak to a lawyer. Here's 3 names of lawyers, or whatever. I would guess that half of the liability cases I have against realtors would go away if they had just said, go to speak to a lawyer, because then that would insulate them from liability on that issue. Because, if you told them to talk to a lawyer and they still went forward to the transaction, it's really hard for me to say you messed up now. But when you take on the risk of having the knowledge of an attorney, which is what you're doing by practicing law in a real estate transaction, you not telling them to go speak to an attorney, even if it's only, something at the bottom of an email that says, this is a complex transaction, I have to advise you in this and every transaction, speak to a lawyer that can handle these. Even if they don't do it, you can point back later when they start pointing fingers to say, well, I told you to speak to a lawyer. Why are you coming after me? So it's really practicing a little bit of defensive real estate. And unfortunately, in this day and age, that's what has to happen. I say that only because I see it. I only see it when it goes bad. I don't see the 28 transactions that you guys did where nobody complained and your clients loved every moment of working with you. I only see that one transaction with that one client who was candidly a bit crazy. And, that's what comes up. And it happens. And I wish it didn't. I wish everyone would just love the work we do. But that doesn't always happen with my business either. Okay. Well, one more type of transaction we see, and we see it a lot more with land transactions, is this concept of a contract for deed. And a contract for deed is under a different set of statutes, ARS 33-741 through 740 something. But effectively, what it is you get the deed once you pay for the property in full. And if you don't pay for the property, or if you miss a payment, then there's a certain set of statutes that says, okay, if you've paid 50% or more, you have to give 180-day notice to cure before you can rescind the transaction. If it's 30 days, you have to give a different number. Again, it's horribly technical, and candidly, it is completely disfavored by most attorneys in town. But it's something you see a lot in land contracts. And a lot of times the reason is in land contracts is that it's done this way is, nobody really knows and nobody's doing their due diligence. It's kind of the wild, wild west. And you're trying to find any way to offload this $10,000 property. And so you're going to let them pay in payments. And so they kind of enter in this contract for deed transaction. But understand there's huge risk in those for you guys, because there's just not a lot of education on making sure that they know if they default and don't care, then they rescind their rights to the property, and it gets a little messy. And it's a type of transaction that you see often where people aren't doing their due diligence and title, and generally you get title insurance and a contract for deed at the end once you've paid for the property in full. Well, if you paid for the property in full and you get a title insurance policy that has all kinds of problems with it, from other loans on the property to other issues to an oil spill for all the other issues, you don't want to have pay for your property in full before you find that out. And so there's real risk in doing a contract for deed, because you're paying for the property and then you're finding out some of these things. And that's kind of the rent to own model, which kind of runs the same path as a contract for deed, where you're paying payments, and then if you pay the purchase price and payments, the rental goes towards the purchase price, then that it's kind of the same model, but it really is a contract for deed. And so if you're making rent to own contracts, you're probably doing it wrong, because what you're really doing is having a contract for deed without knowing it. And so if you're doing it, and again, a lot of this is to say that the farther away you get from a traditional transaction, the more risk you expose yourself and your brokerage to. And so don't do it. But I wanted to let you see those types of transactions, or hear about them at least. And so that there's a traditional loan, there's a carryback, there's subject to transactions or wrap mortgages. There's lease with option to purchase, there's contract for deeds. I want you to understand what those are. And so when someone says, hey, what do you think about this offer I got for a carryback transaction? You can say, well, that's fine. But, then you can go to your client and say, understand that you're going to be the lender. Are you comfortable being the lender? Are you comfortable understanding the risk and doing the due diligence of a lender? Either way, I need you to speak to an attorney. But if you're going to get, as representing sellers, you're going to get people making these offers to you. And you got to be able to talk to your client about what these offers mean, or what these clients offers even are. And understand too, that when you get those offers, number one, contact your broker, because there's risk to the brokerage if they accept it. Number two, your broker may not let you do those deals in many cases. I'll trust your broker to properly advise you on what ones he's comfortable doing and not comfortable doing. But, I just want you to see that there's at least 5 types of transactions out there that people, when you represent sellers, that the buyers are making offers in kind of these weird ways. And, I want you to see those and see them for what they are, which is the way that they don't have to pay anything and take the risk, and your client, as the seller's representative and as the seller's agent, you get to take the risk on that. And so I want you to understand that. So when you get those, I had a friend who had a listing recently and got all 5 of these type of transactions offers on the property. And so the traditional one was low. The seller carryback was 2% interest, and then we had to ask the question, with the 2% interest, if Chase Bank's not willing to do this deal for 10%, for 2%, why are you? But if you have a sophisticated client that wants that extra cash flow and that extra monthly payment, and is sophisticated enough to be the lender and to make the interest payment, and wants that annuity of payments for 30 years, great. We can work with that. But the people that are accepting these aren't sophisticated enough to understand what even that means to step in the shoes of the lender, and what even a lender does to underwrite the deal. There may be a reason why they're not underwriting the deal. There could be a bankruptcy, there could be a fraud judgment or something else. And you don't want your client buying into that without knowing why they're not able to qualify with the traditional bank and why your client should pay for that. So that's a lot to say, that there's a whole lot of ways to, when we see a traditional transaction, that you could be presented with an offer that could create exposure or risk to you. And a lot of what I wanted to talk to you about today is, looking at those type of things, what those look like. I'm happy to speak on this topic or more for hours on end if you let me, but I wanted to certainly open it up. I don't know how much time you had slotted for me, so.
No, this was fantastic. Thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today. I have a whole page of notes here myself for things that I was taking, all from the way that the investors should be protecting their assets, all the way down to the carrybacks and the subject twos. So we get a lot of these, the subject twos and the carrybacks on our property. So I get these calls from the agents all the time. And just to let you know, we most likely have turned them down. I don't think we've done any of them, just because of the risk factor. And when I talk to the agents about that, we talk about the risk to them and the risk to the brokerage when it comes to those. And ultimately, our fiduciary responsibility to our client is to protect them, and to having a little bit more education in order to distinguish what transactions are best for them, or at least be able to have the conversation with them so they can make the best informed decision for themselves is half the battle. So I do think that this was extremely informative for me. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Degnan? Okay, Brian, do you have
I
any?
raised my hand.
Okay, Nicole.
I just thought it might be useful for because I refer Dave rather often. Dave, what are the type of referrals that you see agents needing to send their clients to you for?
Well, right now we're seeing from agents, we're seeing a couple different, this goes to another area of, I guess what I'll say is understand that you are their agent for the transaction only. If the transaction doesn't close and they cancel the transaction, you are no longer their realtor, is the position I take, because you are only their agent for the transaction inside the transaction. Once you go beyond and they start making non-disclosure and misrepresentation claims or claims for specific performance, get it off your desk. Don't, this is one of those situations where I would say no good deed goes unpunished for the realtor to continue its representation after the transaction has fallen apart and closed, and not closed, or after the closing of the transaction, especially. What I see is a lot of times that realtors want to get involved with the notice to cure and the demand for mediation, and then, and try to help their client as much as possible. But the only thing you're doing after the transaction to stay involved, other than sending it to your realtor, which is probably what you should do anyway, The only thing you're doing is setting yourself up to be pulled into the lawsuit either as a witness or a defendant. And so what I'll say is with these non-disclosure and misrepresentation claims, somebody buys a property that the roof falls off, 3 days after closing, your job is to refer it out. Do not try to be there to, be their best friend and tell them to. And so what I'll say is that with those type of claims, make sure you're being a realtor in the scope of the transaction. The second thing I'm seeing is I had a client very recently that tightened a water valve and during a real estate transaction, and the realtor that tightened a water valve, because they touched the property for the sake of doing some minor maintenance, they lost all of their insurance when there was a flood down the road. And there was no coverage for the realtor at all, just because they did a little bit of construction work on the property. So what I'll say is be a little careful, because I saw that come up recently. The third type of thing we're seeing come in is where in a condo situation, the upstairs is, we get water leaks into our property. And, again, it's usually after the closing. And again, I would say you do not want to jump in the middle of that because, again, no good deed goes unpunished. And the fourth is what we're seeing a lot is when you represent clients on multiple transactions, just be a little careful that you may not have, or you may have acquired transaction, or if, for example, if you represent a flipper and they bought the property a year ago and you were the one that did the buy side, and so all the information about it from a year ago, and then you get a SPUDS that says, there's no work done to the property when it's a complete remodel. We're seeing a lot of agents get dinged for that. Is they know that the information from the last transaction is not, and they're a pretty easy target in those cases. So that's a lot of what we're seeing, the non-disclosure, misrepresentation, the neighbor disputes, and some of the flippers gone crazy. We're seeing a lot now. Unfortunately, we're also seeing a lot of investors but that's a little bit different, where investors are flipping property on hard money, and the properties are just staying on the market a long time right now, and that's creating all kinds of craziness.
So when a agent has a client that needs to speak to you, what does that look like as far as that goes? Is it like they have to pay for a 1-hour consultation, or what is your process?
Yeah, sure. So there's two options in my firm. The first is that if you need 10 minutes, you or your client need 10 minutes, we do offer a free consultation. That's just a telephone consultation. That's just, okay, you need 10 minutes or 10, 15 minutes. And usually I can game plan or strategize, okay, you need to file a notice to cure, you need to make a demand for mediation, and before we can move forward with litigation. And then, so that's usually the first step. Is we're happy to, if there's no contract review and I'm not having to do a bunch of stuff with it, generally a 10-minute call is all we need. But if you want to, the client also has the option of doing a longer consult and a document review, and we would send a new client form and you would elect that option, and that would be $400 in our office.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah. And any other questions so that we can let Mr. Degnan get on with his day? Brian, do you have anything?
I don't, but thank you so much for your time, Dave.
No problem. No, I'm happy to help. And if you guys ever need someone to speak on all kinds of fun topics, flipper liability is going to be the next fun one. We're going to see a lot of flippers go belly up with the number of homes on the market. So that's coming.
Well, like Brian said, we really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us. I learned a ton, and I appreciate you speaking on the risk liability of the brokerage, because sometimes I know I get a little pushback when they say, well, why can't we do this? And I'm telling them that, ultimately we're trying to protect you and protect the brokerage at the same time. And not all transactions are good transactions, and so I have learned a lot today. So again, I appreciate your time, and yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
No problem. Happy to help. And I'll send my outline for you guys too, if you want it.
Yes.
And just, I'll send that to Earl under a separate cover, and we'll go from there. Thanks, guys, for having me, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thank
Talk
you.
to soon.
Hey, Earl.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention, when in doubt, agents should definitely check with their escrow officer on things, because a lot of times it really comes down to whether or not title will insure the property.
Right. Yep.
And that's important to realize as well. So always check with your escrow officers, just because they are a wealth of knowledge for your agents.
That's good advice.
I'll be a witness to that. I've sent, I think, 2 listings to GAT this year that they told me ahead of time that they wouldn't insure. So the deal fell through. But at the end of the day, I protected our client and ourselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just got to avoid those types of deals.
So cool. How's everyone doing so far? Quiet group.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Good.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you. Thank you, Lily. So I have another portion of the meeting that I'm going to kind of condense a little bit because we got about 9 minutes. And what I'll do is I am going to probably follow up with our broker briefing call on Monday with some of this information. But we can get started with it and go as far as we can. So ultimately, what I wanted to talk about a little bit today, in addition to the assumptions and what's happening out in the market as far as legal and how the law is after all of us. But what is a buyer's market? Right now, you keep hearing people say it's a buyer's market, it's a buyer's market. What exactly does that mean? And what does that mean to us? So here's the definition of a buyer's market. Buyer's market in Phoenix, Arizona refers to a real estate market condition where buyers have more leverage than sellers due to higher inventory levels and reduced competition. It typically occurs when supply exceeds demand, meaning there's more homes for sale than there are buyers actively looking to purchase. So this is also the indicators of the buyer's market. So when we talk about the months of inventory, these are the houses that are on the market. So over 5 to 6 months of inventory. Price reductions, we start seeing more sellers that are reducing their prices and often aggressive. I just had a $20,000 price reduction in Santan Valley the other day. Days on the market, higher than the local average. Typically, I think right now our average is about 57 days, but we've been seeing them go. We have listings that have been over 100 days. Seller concessions, common. Closing cost help or rate buy downs with the rate market that we're in right now. We've seen, I think, average in Phoenix seller concessions are about 10,000. So as you're pricing your homes with your sellers, be sure you're talking to them about possibly giving concessions when we know that the average is about 10,000 right now. List to sell ratio, often 100%. Home sell below asking price. Multiple offers. So right now, bidding wars are rare because we have a lot more homes that buyers can choose for or can choose from. So ultimately, in a neighborhood where you would normally have one home and you have all the buyers that are bidding for that one home, now you have 10. And those 10 homes, they can choose which ones they want. Buyer incentives, builders. We all know what's happening with the builders right now. I just closed a couple where they were giving up to $30,000 in seller incentives. So some of the questions that I had here that I was going to ask you guys as we go into this buyer market, and we'll kind of talk about this. I'll just go here. Do you know, well, as a buyer's agent, do you know roughly how much time you spend with each buyer? Has anyone ever broken that down?
It was 16 hours before.
Used to
I
be
memorized
16
that.
hours.
Yeah.
Roughly 16 hours you spend with each buyer. But in today's market, in your buyer's market, this is what they're saying. Your average time spent with the buyer's agents per buyer. So 1 to 2 hours on the consultation and prep. The loan pre-qualification assistance is about 1 to 2 hours. The home search, showing tours, 10 to 25 hours. Market research and comps, 2 to 4 hours. Writing offers, 3 to 6 hours. So roughly, Brian's calculating there, you're roughly about 54 hours that you're spending with each buyer. Can anybody tell me what a regular average work week is? for a 9 to 5 job?
40.
40. So you mean to tell me that I spend 56 hours total with each buyer? If I have multiple buyers, technically you're working more than a 40-hour week. Is that accurate to say? They're saying that it can actually get up to 60 to 70 hours when it comes to indecisive first buyers, in the multiple offer situation, buyers that are not qualified, those that are out of state that may be relocating, buyers that are unfamiliar with different areas. So Mesa versus Queen Creek versus Levine. You're driving all over the place. That's me. I drive all over the place. New construction purchases could take longer because you have to do the walkthroughs and the orientations. So there's a lot of steps that go into being a buyer's agent. So some of the things I'm going to talk about real quick in the last 5 minutes is there's a new program out that all members of Phoenix Association of Realtors will have this service at no cost to them because the Phoenix Association partner with them. But it's a service called Rise. It's Raise.
Raise, I
It's
believe.
RAYSE. And for those that are part of the Phoenix Association, they can, and we'll send out the information in this, but they, what it does is it breaks down. It also includes a buyer presentation, and it can customize it to you. You can give your buyer an app or access to an app that will show everything that you do, so that it does make it easier when you're saying, hey, Mr. Buyer, you may have to pay me 3% compensation for representing you. I have not had a buyer question it yet, but I think the more we start to see that, the more this tool is going to be able to help us to justify what it is that we do for our buyers. Yeah, we'll skip over that. I'll touch that this week. So raise.com. And this is a video that was sent to me by Raise in order to kind of talk about sorry, I'm looking for my notes. It goes over the program itself and how it works. But it's again, no cost. For those that are not a part of PAR, let me know, and we'll talk offline about how to get you access to this as well. But I took some notes on it as I watched this video, but it says there's a new app that allows the buyers to soon, and soon the sellers too. Right now it's just for buyers to see where you are in each transaction. It'll also log and show time that you're dedicating to them in each part of the transaction. Your buyers will get an up-to-date log during the transaction and a full closing log that'll show all the hours it took for you to find their dream home. The log will also show how many miles and hours that you use driving. And then ultimately this tool is being used in other markets right now to help justify, our compensation, because a lot of buyers are pushing back. Like, why am I paying you to show me this one house? But what they don't see is everything that we do on the back end. And those are the things that most of us don't ever even talk about because we just do it so seamlessly. So with that being said, raise.com, I'll send this information out. I encourage you to take a look at it because I think it could be a great opportunity for us to just have a new tool in our tool belt. And for, again, those that are a part of PAR, it doesn't cost you anything to do it. Those that are not, reach out to me and we will figure out how to get you access to it if you want to use this tool as well.
So this link that's on your screen, if you want to screenshot it, that'll take you to the video that was provided to Earl, and then the passcode is right there. And I think it's a 28-minute video.
Yeah, it's a 28-minute video, but it's very informative. So I was able to go through it and get some information. But okay, so the other part about the buyer's agency, I will follow up on our broker briefing call. And so document changes and updates. The only thing that I have for that one is we're going to be asking that the commission disbursement authorization be submitted for all rentals and .loop just to help us with our accounting. Keep in mind that all paperwork must be uploaded to .loop within 48 hours after execution. And then we wanted you to book your half-year reviews with Brian covering your marketing and business strategy. We would love to see where you are as far as your business goals that you set for this year. And ultimately get your marketing up and running if you have not already. First quarter acknowledgments. So far, we've closed 21 sides for a total of 9.4 million as a brokerage. We are on track to hit our goal this year. So everyone continue to push forward and do the great things that you're already doing. And yeah, we're extremely excited for the rest of the year. So
And we got you out on time today.
look at that. That was the plan. So thank you all for being here.